Welcome to another live Action for Happiness event. Where the title today is Life Hacks for Happiness, and we're going to be covering a real reminder of how our actions can make a difference to our own well-being, but also in the world around us, covering topics like relationships, dealing with stress, the importance of nature, and so much more. And I'm delighted that we're joined by a fantastic expert in health, happiness, and well-being, and a dear friend of mine, Dr. Radha. Lovely to see you, Radha.
Hello, it's lovely to be here, Mark. Thanks so much.
So, everyone who's here, if you're new to this, a very warm welcome. This is not just like a static event where you get to watch something happening. You get to be part of this event, participating in the chat where you'll be keeping it kind and supportive as always, but also a chance to put your questions to Radha. So please use the Q&A function. And also we'll be doing a few interactive things together along the way. If you're a regular, thanks for being part of this amazing community. This is one of many things we do together as the Action for Happiness community in building a happier and kinder world together. And all of what you do makes a big difference, not just for yourself, but I hope, as we'll be talking about again tonight, we can all have an impact on the world around us too. Radha, it's really nice to be back doing another event with you again. You've become a trustee of Action for Happiness since we last did a live event together. I wondered if you might maybe just give us a little reminder about you, your professional background, but also you and your interest in this topic.
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. I remember the first time I came on with you, and I was just struck afterwards, first by how incredible your community is and how supportive they are. And it was just really beautiful. I really love the energy. And yeah, I've been absolutely honoured and thrilled to be now a trustee for Action for Happiness, which has been fantastic. So it's been absolutely brilliant to work with all of you and to see, the wider movement and what's happening. So that's been really, really exciting. And otherwise, yeah, so I'm Dr. Radha. I'm a doctor, medical doctor, GP. I've been in broadcasting for about 12 or 13 years. Started off just really by my elder sister seeing an advert for a TV program, which she hurriedly persuaded me to apply for, and then I really loved it. So my main passions really are about mental health, emotional well-being, but very aligned to Action for Happiness in that I'm very keen on the practical aspect of what we can actually do day to day to make a difference for ourselves and other people. And I also, alongside with TV and radio, I also write for the newspaper and do a weekly column. And basically just get involved in anything that's positive, really. That's kind of been my remit. So it's really lovely to be here with you tonight, Mark, and with everyone as well. So thanks so much for having me.
Lovely. And the theme is life hacks for happiness. And of course, we're all in some ways looking for ways to feel better, to find a sense of meaning and purpose, and to live the best possible life. And yet, of course, as we all know, it's hard. This human condition is full of ups and downs, and many of us are dealing with all kinds of challenges, very real barriers and obstacles to our happiness. And I think to make this an authentic conversation, I know authenticity is a topic you're passionate about as well. Maybe we could start by turning to each other and to those in the community and perhaps checking in on some of the obstacles to our happiness. So maybe if I invite anyone who's here who wants to participate, maybe share in a few words something that's a challenge towards your happiness right now. And then Radha, we can look at these and have a little chat about some of what's coming up. So what are some of the barriers to your happiness, folks? And I'll read a few of
Mm.
these out. So,
Mm.
relationship challenges, bereavement, chronic pain, bullying colleagues, health problems, a family member who's struggling, aging parents, long COVID, the news, fatigue, loneliness, cancer, the weather, political anger, financial issues. Life hasn't turned out the way I thought it would be. Busy career, caregiving, struggling with children, disappointment, failing perfectionism, unfulfilled dreams, anxiety, lack of money, autism, and more that I can even read out as they come flying past. But well, how are you feeling as you see that list, Radha? Because that's quite overwhelming in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, thank you for sharing all of that because I think that's really helpful for everyone who's listening and perhaps doesn't necessarily feel able to sort of share what's bothering them. But it helps people to feel not so alone with that. And I think, like you said, Mark, at this particular time, the world always feels a bit uncertain. But I think right now, from my professional work right through to friends and family, and just the wider sort of work that I do in terms of broadcasting, I think the pressure on people is really immense. I think there are so many different challenges that we face in all aspects, I think, of the world and life. And just reading through some of those that everyone is mentioning, it really does feel like every area of our lives is being kind of squeezed at the moment. And I think it's even more important, therefore, that we try to find those kind of simple, daily, sort of tangible ways, things that are in our control when everything else feels very out of control, to help ourselves feel a bit better and support each other with that. It's those sort of small actions, I think, when there are such big things in the world and big things we're worrying about, what can we do in the here and now, in those sort of moment to moment choices that can actually help us feel a bit more grounded and a bit safe? Because I think emotional safety is really what a lot of people are struggling with, because of all of these issues that are coming up around the world.
Yeah, thank you for saying emotional safety, and I wanted to echo what you said and to show gratitude to everyone who's had the courage to share something that's going on right now. This is a public event, and if you are dealing with severe issues, we would of course both encourage you to seek additional help if needed. Radha, obviously you work in as a professional in the health service, and you're fully aware of the importance of reaching out for that help. But also, I think you're making a really important point, which is there are some things outside of our control, and there are also some things that we can control. And I guess what we're focusing on today is where do I have some choice and where do I have some agency to make even little steps? So maybe before we turn back to the audience for some more ideas on this and hear some of yours, do you think that little actions can make a difference? And if so, why? And how does that build? And how do we deal with this tricky thing about habits? Because we're all creatures of habit, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think actually sometimes it's helpful to sort of bring the conversation around well-being and happiness back to sort of small micro habits. We often use the word habit, we hear the word habit in relation to diet and exercise, or you should do this, and that's a bad habit. Maybe our parents used to tell us it was a bad habit to bite our fingernails. We hear that word, and sometimes that word is associated with sort of negatives or blaming or sort of judgment or being told what to do. But interestingly, actually, if we frame our ability to sort of find happiness or cultivate happiness or well-being, it really is based in very small habits. And what's interesting about this is our brain is there to sort of help us with this. So in our brain, we have things called habit loops. So basically, we do something, we feel a certain way, or we get a particular reward or outcome from that. And if it's a positive one, then that will positively reinforce kind of what we think, and that will make us then continue to behave and to act out that action again, because we get a positive emotional response from that. But if we do that over and over again, we form these kind of circles, these habit loops of sort of action, feeling or reward, and then positive reinforcement, and it drives around in a kind of in loop, basically. And that's great if those things are kind of helpful for us and making us feel better, but obviously not so great if they're not. But over time, those become more and more concrete and more solid in our brain, so that actually the space between thinking about doing something and actually doing it gets shorter. So it almost becomes automatic. And that's basically what a habit is. It's just an automatic behavior that happens very quickly. And the space between us thinking about it and doing it is very short, as opposed to considering kind of what the outcomes are. So with sort of happiness and well-being, it's about kind of looking at those habits, so looking at those thoughts and actions, and really just trying to elongate that space between them. So we have an ability or a choice point, if you like, to kind of intercede. And if it's not such a great habit for us, then actually we can change that. But really, when you think about all of the stuff that's good for us, those moment-to-moment choices, whether or not that's going for a walk or having a bath or calling a friend when we need help, they are basically kind of those choice points. So if we sort of learn how to do that more, we repeat that, we practice it over and over again, then actually we're going to form those habits for happiness, and they're going to become more and more natural. A bit like gratitude. A lot of you may have heard about gratitude journals, and when you first start trying to write a few things you're grateful for, it might seem a bit of a bother. But gradually you do it more and more and more, it becomes just something that's very, very automatic, and then you don't even need to write it down. It just happens to you kind of through the
Found
day.
that actually, that was what I was quite skeptical about, but actually the enjoyment of it and the benefit of it meant that it sort of became almost as natural as brushing my teeth, as a sort of, habit that just lasts. But I think you
Yes.
said a really important thing there, which I think is sometimes missed, which is that it's in some ways it's not thinking that leads to feeling different. It's almost like doing something that then leads to, well, it's the action can lead the feeling, not be the outcome from it. And in fact, what I found with this is that we're all different, so we want the sort of universal experience of feeling good and feeling happy, and yet the roots to it are personal. We have different backgrounds,
Mm.
preferences, and so I like to think of it as being your own happiness scientist or going on your own happiness adventure. And I've tried things that don't work for me. I've found that affirmations don't work particularly well for me, or HIIT workouts, and yet other things have surprised me at how much they've really changed my life, like doing a little bit of mindfulness in the morning, getting on my bike, and singing in a community choir. I was not
Mm.
expecting that to be as effective as it was. So I like the fact that we can dabble a little bit and find out what works and what gives us that sense of I could keep doing this. But we need it feels like we need a bit of courage to just sort of try. What do you think?
I think I totally agree with what you say. I think it's probably more that we're so used to the conversation around happiness and well-being, sort of as being very templated, as of being told what to do. This is how you feel better. This is how you look after yourself, and it's that kind of almost that sort of top-down pyramid type thing where the idea of happiness comes from an external sort of template. This is what everyone should do. We're going to stamp it on everyone. You have to follow these things and it will work for you. And obviously, we're all individuals, we're all different. We have different chemistry, different makeups, different genetics, different backgrounds. So, how can one size fit all? It just doesn't. So, I think it is a bit of courage to kind of step out of that box and say, do you know what, that might work for that person, but I'm going to try it. But if it doesn't work for me, that's absolutely fine. I'm then going to go and try something different. So I think it's about the courage to step out of a sort of a templated world that
Yeah.
we live in, and also courage, I think, to be authentic and actually to stand in your own space and say, actually, I love doing this and this is who I am. And I think, again, we're human beings. We like to be part of a group and belong somewhere. And we worry if we step out of the box and we do something different, we may not. But the great news is there's so many of us in this world that we're always going to find people who have similar sort of strategies. And I think it's about having that courage and almost being comfortable standing in your own space and being authentic.
I love that. And of course, you have tried things out in your own life. You've written a fantastic book, but you've also worked with lots and lots of people on these topics. So in a moment, I'm really looking forward to exploring some of your favorite life hacks and what we can learn from them and whether we might want to try them out ourselves. But before we do that, we've also got a little wisdom in this community. And so we started with some of the challenges to our happiness, but I'd like to turn back to all of you now, wherever you are in the world, and maybe ask what are some of your life hacks for happiness? What are some of the things that you have found, to Radha's point about small actions, really can change how you feel? There could be habits that last, and we'll just see what some of the common themes are. Again, I'll read some out. So, getting into nature, exercise, baking a cake, running, live music, flowers, smiling, theatre, keeping perspective, walking, getting outside, hot yoga, cycling, tai chi, choir, hiking, a power nap, laughter, hanging out with friends, volunteering, chocolate, cuddling my dog, hugs, music, church, socializing, baking a pie, breathing exercises, violin, going to bed early. Wow, I love the range of wisdom in the chat here, Radha. What do you think?
I think they're all fantastic, and I'm just imagining a whole day with all of those at once. Actually, they're all
That's a
things that
big
I'd like
day.
to do
Yeah.
myself. I think there are some really beautiful ones in there, and there are ones that we kind of often ignore as adults, like joy or cuddles or having a hug. And the one I love out of all of those best is going to bed early, because I don't think we really focus on sleep as much as we should do, and we almost seem to see it as an inconvenience, whereas actually it is, along with exercise and sort of socializing. I think it's one of the mainstays that keeps us well. So I love that one. That's particularly my favorite, I think.
Um, Thank you all for sharing those. And Radha, of course, a way you share some of your life hacks is in your regular column that you write for the iPaper, where each week you pick a different sort of theme. And so I love checking in with those. And something I've heard you talk about, and we mentioned when we spoke a little bit earlier today, was this idea of healthy escapism. Tell us what that is and why that might be a life hack or something you value.
Yeah, so I think sometimes the conversation around happiness and keeping well, it can sometimes feel like like a lot of hard work, or like a struggle, or that actually because we want to attain that or to get there, that actually we work really hard at it, and we have to always be processing our feelings and always kind of doing things to ensure that we're well, and that can feel quite heavy and that can feel quite busy, and sometimes that can actually create another layer, or another obstacle to us actually feeling happy and feeling well. So one of my favorite things to sort of talk about or think about is healthy escapism. So sometimes, escapism is normally a word that sometimes is used as almost like you're going into denial, or you're trying to hide from things, or it's not healthy for you to just run away from the situation. You should tackle it head on. But actually, sometimes healthy escapism, where you're having a break from processing and kind of the working hard at the well-being, is actually really helpful. Gives your mind a break. It allows you to get a perspective over things. It also allows you to sometimes find the answers, from within you, rather than trying to work them out with our brains, which doesn't necessarily always come out with the best outcome. But also it allows us to use our imagination. We get creative. I mean, all the things that were mentioned there, baking and gardening and singing, for example, they're all ways of actually getting away from our worries and our sort of stresses, and a form of escapism, a form of imagination, if you like, or creativity. So I think, if you were to think about a sort of a pendulum, sometimes in life we need to let the pendulum swing towards processing things and doing the hard work when it comes to well-being, but sometimes we need to let the pendulum swing the other way and have a break from it all and just have some joy and build our resilience and have some creativity, and just to literally just take our minds completely away from what's going on. And I think that pendulum sort of swinging between the two is actually really healthy, as opposed to it being stuck in one direction or the other. So that's one of my things that I love to do.
Thank you. That's really clear. So, of course, escapism can be unhealthy. We know sticking a Netflix box set on every night may not be the best form of escapism, or indulging in like food as a way of getting away from difficult feelings or pushing away difficult feelings. But so some examples you gave, I think you mentioned like cooking, creativity, gardening. I'm not sure what are some other ways that we can be in our bodies, in our senses, and be sort of disconnected from the hard processing, but having that healthy form of escapism.
Yeah, so you kind of touched on it there. It's really about using your body rather than your mind. So that might be, trampolining, it might be kind of dancing, it might be running, it might also be using, your nose and actually kind of aromatherapy, or baking and cooking and smelling all those lovely smells. It might be using your hands, it might be like crafting, knitting, crocheting, getting out in the garden and using your hands in the soil, for example. Or it might be your eyes. Again, in nature is a really good example of that. Painting, all of those kind of things where we're using our senses, so smell and touch, and our bodies basically, because when we use our bodies, our minds really kind of have to stop. So all of those allow you to have a little bit of escapism from the brain, and sometimes when we're ruminating or we're thinking too much. But also, I suppose a more kind of concentrated form of that, of escapism, is sometimes kind of imagination. So sitting there and visualizing or visioning where you'd like to be. I don't know if any of you have done this, but sometimes if I'm in my car and I'm parked up in stationery, and even if it's winter, but there's sort of winter sun, and I've got my car heater on, I can almost sort of trick myself or trick my brain into thinking I'm on holiday, or it's a really hot summer day, with the right song on the radio, with the kind of with that warmth and the sun on your face. So it's amazing. Your brain really is an amazing tool, and you can actually use your senses to almost put yourself in a different mental state, and to help yourself, I suppose, feel a bit better. So again, another example is suntan lotion. If you were to put that on your skin right now and smell it, you probably would be taken away into the feeling that you have when you're on holiday on the beach, and yet you're in your house. So these are just little ways of just trying to give yourself a little bit of an escape from
Thank
kind of
you.
the
I
stresses
love
of
this.
day-to-day
I love
life.
this healthy escapism tip. And of course, one of the reasons it matters is not that we're kind of pushing stuff away, but actually when we're able to cultivate that, just feeling a little bit better, we're also then better able to be a good partner, a good friend, a good colleague. It actually is a beneficial sort of shift in our state of mind. And that brings me on to another topic I've seen you write so beautifully about, and is the perennial source of joy and also challenge in our life, and that's our relationships. We are, of course, a social species. Do you want to say a little bit about relationships? I mean, I'm sure it's a topic that comes up a lot in your work.
Yes, it's probably one of the most popular topics, I think. And whenever I talk about it, there's always a huge response, not surprisingly. But I mean, science tells us, research tells us that actually relationships, meaningful, authentic relationships, are the mainstay of our well-being. They are almost like a fail-safe. They're one of the foundation stones, really, for us feeling well and being well. And I think that the kind of clue is in those words. It's meaningful and authentic. So, you know, we might have many friends, we might have many different relationships, but how are they making us feel? Are we able to be ourselves within them? And I think one of the key factors I think about healthy relationships is that, ironically, sometimes we sort of want to present the best version of ourselves to the people around us, because we think if we present the best version, they'll love us more, they'll care about us more, and they'll hang around. But ironically, actually, the opposite is true, in that, you know, if we show who we are, if we're ourselves, we're authentic and we're vulnerable and we put ourselves out there, then actually those relationships by definition are going to be stronger and they're going to be more meaningful, because we're being completely ourselves, without any barriers, without any masks. And so ironically, you know, we try our best, don't we, to sort of be like, oh yes, I'm fine and everything's fine, but actually that almost is a barrier to actually having a strong relationship that lasts. So I think one of my tips would be to really kind of take a breath. If you're feeling a bit scared or a bit vulnerable about opening up to someone, obviously someone that you trust and you feel safe with, but if you're feeling a bit like that, just take a breath and just trust that process and just open up and just see what the difference is between being vulnerable in terms of how strong your relationship is versus not. I mean, I know someone who finds asking for help very, very tricky, because they sort of feel like they should do it on their own. And yet, when they do ask for people for help, then their relationships, their friendships get stronger, they feel better, the other person benefits from it. So yeah, it's about just kind of, I think, taking a deep dive and just being like, I'm going to trust this and I'm going to be who I am. And I'm sure lots of you probably, when you start off particularly romantic relationships, you know, people usually put up a bit of a front for maybe the first sort of 6 months, maybe, and they're trying to kind of show their best side, but you can't keep that up forever. That's quite tiring, and that's often when you find romantic relationships actually starts to deteriorate, is when people, the kind of the mask sort of slips, and then people kind of like, hang on a minute, I thought you were this person, now you're someone else, or you're different. And so just starting off relationships, friendships, as you are, and being proud of that, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I really like that. And I wonder if the pendulum point you made so beautifully around escapism is relevant here as well. Because I am a believer in what you might call small talk, and like the friendship and the friendliness and just checking in, and even a bit of banter and like laughter and silliness with relationships is really powerful.
Mm.
And yet I feel that the other way that the healthy pendulum can swing is towards what I sometimes call conversations that matter, which we sort of avoid, you know, the how am I really feeling? What am I actually worried
Mm.
about? What are my hopes? And I mean, even little things like I found that if I need to have a difficult conversation with a loved one, even just starting it by saying there's something I want to talk to you about, I'm a bit worried about this because I know it's a difficult topic and I'm actually a bit scared to mention it, but it's
Mm.
important. That kind
Yeah.
of taking the mask off and showing that I care about our relationship, but I'm also a bit nervous about this. It's such a great way of disarming, a difficult situation. So I mean, I love the fact you're
Mm.
encouraging us to be vulnerable. But I guess we need to choose who we lower our
Mm.
guard with. Do you think?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, there's always a caveat to that, in that, like you say, if you've got to sort of trust your intuition, you've got to have a sense of, you know, who you can trust emotionally to be able to do that with. Because on the converse, as you say, you know, if we open up and we're vulnerable to people who aren't necessarily going to respond in a great way, or we're going to feel even more vulnerable or judged, for example, that's going to then potentially shut us down from doing that again. So I think it's about taking it slow and steady. I'm really I think, using your intuition about actually who this person is. The amazing thing is, once you do actually share that, you'll find the other person, most likely, if they're the right kind of person you've chosen, they're actually going to open up as well. And then what you have there is a beautiful, beautiful relationship, because then you've both got two people who are being their complete true selves and who are connecting over that. And that's really where,
And
you
it's a
know,
sort of
that's why the
deeper
relationship's so good.
connection. Yeah, it feels
Exactly,
like
exactly.
something that
Yeah.
gets a bit more profound and lasting in a way. Let's move on because in related to this idea of a relationships, there's a lot of interesting stuff that I see come up, and I'm sure you'll know more about than me in many ways. But um, I guess I'd lump it under this broader theme of nurturing things. So obviously relationships, but also pets seem to be an important source of happiness for many people. I know you have a dog, and I have a dog as well, and but also in the natural world, planting things and growing things and caring for plants. What is it about nurture and living things, and how does that contribute to our happiness?
Mm. Yes, I think that's a great point. I think like you say, nurturing, so nurturing of self, but also of others. I think nurturing other living creatures or other people, it basically just gives us a sense of purpose, I think, which is really important. But it also, I think, allows us to see that what we do has an impact, what we do matters. And you can see a journey, you can see progress, you can see, maybe that I mean, when you plant a seed, you see that grow, you see that develop, and that's related to the input and the energy you're giving it, which I think is really lovely. So I think it is about sort of a sense of what I do actually can make a difference, and having that sense of I suppose, autonomy, but also an ability to actually affect change, which again is proven to be really great for our health and well-being. Um, I mean, aside from sort of, thinking about pets, I mean, again, you've got the other benefits of, routine and structure and someone else relying on you, for example, to get out of bed in the morning. You've also got the companionship and, reduction in loneliness. And, we know that not just dogs and cats, but, looking at fish, for example, has been shown to reduce your blood pressure and your heart rate and reduce your cortisol, your stress hormone levels. So it really does have a huge impact. And I suppose wider to that, thinking about, nature as a whole, that in itself has a really massive impact, I think, on how we feel. Nature gives us a sense of constancy, a certainty in a very uncertain world. It also gives us a sense of perspective as well, which I think is really helpful. But going back to nurturing and nature, again, nature nurtures us. It
Mm.
gives us the air we breathe, and it gives us beautiful things to look at, and it sustains us. And so I think, if we then reverse that and we then nurture and look after nature, then actually, again, that's almost going back to that relationship idea where you've got two parties and they're both mutually supporting each other. And we are, at the end of the day, we try to separate ourselves, or society has tried to separate ourselves from nature in the way that we source our food, the way we work, the way we live. But ultimately, we can't ever get rid of, I think, that inherent connection to nature, because we are from this world. We are part of it. And
Mm.
although society doesn't really allow us to, or it's harder to find that, I think that's where that kind of very close relationship and sense of peace comes when we're outside in nature.
Radha, I'm really enjoying this. You're bringing up so many interesting thoughts. I mean, a couple of things you've shared there really struck me. On that point about the constancy of, or in a sense of sort of almost like safety in nature in an uncertain world. I was out the other day having a kind of like, oh my goodness, I'm stressed about this thing that's happening. And then I looked up and saw a tree that had clearly been stood there for 100 years. And I was like, oh, that tree's been here for ages. And it was sort of like you said, a kind of sense of perspective and grounding, and then also you mentioned a fascinating thing about nurture and how that gives us that sense of, or I guess it's a mixture of autonomy and purpose. And there's that lovely study, I'm sure you're familiar with, of two different groups in nursing homes. One group were given a plant to have in their room and appreciate nature, and the other group were given a plant and encouraged to look after it. And the group that had it watered by the nurses, did not do as well in terms of health outcomes as the group that were encouraged to, water the plant and care for it. Because there's something about that kind of, as you said, caring, but also feeling purposeful that actually nourishes us as well. So I really love how you've reminded us of that reciprocity. I guess ultimately kindness and happiness go hand in hand, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, like you say, it's, and again, I think we sort of see kindness as maybe between two people or between our, with ourselves, but actually, kindness relates to nature, it relates to living creatures, it relates to the world, to the earth. And actually, when you think about, trying to do our best in terms of climate change and trying to look after the environment, that is a relationship in itself, and we are part of that. We can't, separate ourselves from the environment and from what's going on in the climate, because without that we wouldn't be here, we wouldn't have the air to breathe. So sometimes I think just almost taking it right back to the basics of actually, why does this matter? And I think what you were saying before, Mark, about in relationships, when you're saying to someone, I'm a bit worried about this, or we might share that, we're concerned or we're scared. It's the same thing when it comes to these sort of topics. Sometimes we make them so complex that we forget really what the basics are. And the basics is that, we are human beings were made to be together and to have a sense of belonging, or to have a community, or a sense of place, and a sense of purpose, and a sense of belonging. And so actually the whole thing around nurturing is a very inherent, a very natural I suppose it is a habit, or it's a natural attribute that we have. And it's just finding different ways in our own lives that we can actually, I suppose, express that desire to nurture. But it really does make you, like you said, that reciprocity of like kindness and self, altruism. We know that kindness is good for ourselves when we express it and when we help others. So it is very just inherent, I think, in our genetics.
I find that really encouraging, Radha, that in some ways we're just we're trying to reveal something about our sort of underlying nature of the desire to feel loved and valued and connected, and to feel part of nature. And actually modern life in many ways, for all of its amazing benefits and improvements in certain areas, is taking us further and further away from some of those basics. And I think one of the things that I've seen you write about, which again modern life compounds, is the sort of frenetic nature of there's always more to do, you're never enough, you're not good enough. And that's partly the problems of social media and the negativity in the news and other things. But also I think I've been surprised how many people that I see in our community and in the wider world who do so much for others are actually still incredibly hard on themselves. And I wonder if there's well, I've seen you write about self-criticism, and almost I think you talk about an impatience we have. Maybe would you say a bit more about what you think's going on there, and maybe how we can let go of some of that inner critic?
Yeah, I think it's really important to first of all say that we all have an inner critic. It's just some of ours are louder than others, or
Yes.
sometimes some of us are not even aware that there is an inner critic, and we don't necessarily even recognise that. So I suppose if you are struggling with that, then it's great that you actually recognise that that's what's happening, because sometimes things happen so quickly in our brains we don't even realise that's what's happening. We just feel bad and we don't know why. And then I suppose it's just to notice it. So a lot of the self-critic sort of stuff comes sometimes from what we've absorbed from other people when we've been growing up, or what other people have said, what we've heard, or that something difficult has happened in our lives and we then ascribe ourselves to be responsible for that, or that happened because I wasn't good enough, I didn't do this well enough. So sometimes, because we don't like to accept that life is uncertain and we can't control it, we end up taking responsibility because it gives us a weird false sense of control. That bad thing happened because I wasn't good enough, or I didn't do this. And if we do that, then actually we can then say, oh, well, if it was because of me, then that means I can control it and stop it from happening in the future, if that makes sense. So actually we falsely kind of ascribe responsibility. So all of these things can basically add to kind of making our self-critic very loud and quite persistent. But I guess it's all about, again, it's about kind of creating that space between, a thought and a feeling and an action, which we were talking about before with habits. And I know we talk about habits in terms of activities, exercise, etc., but I'm also really keen to talk about habits in terms of how we think, and that chain of thought, feeling, action, because actually we can create new habits. If we think negatively about ourselves, we criticize ourselves a lot, that ultimately, if you take it to basics, is just a habit. And that's great news, because that means we can change that habit. So it's about sitting there, noticing that thought comes up. It's quite self-critical. You notice it. You say, okay, that's interesting. I've thought that. You then feel slightly differently from if you actually accept that to be true, or you're in that kind of whirlwind of believing that thought, and then you can then kind of just let it go, or you can change that thought and create a new habit where you're thinking something slightly less critical. And eventually you keep doing that and you keep doing that, and you'll eventually get from slightly less critical to positive about yourself. We can't do it all the time. And when our resilience is low and our energy is low, it's more difficult. But I think almost treating that self-critic as a kind of habit is quite useful, because it it helps us realize that this is something that we can actually conquer and we can change, as opposed to it just being inherently who we are.
Mm. There's a real important point in that subtlety of sort of the thought journey you just went through there. So part one is just noticing that you're talking harshly to yourself, and I think, as you said, that even just that sort of self-awareness is a really important first step of like, wow, I'm feeling this right now, or I'm being quite hard on myself right now. And then you were making the point that we shouldn't sort of like believe the thoughts as being like, you aren't good enough, you aren't whatever. But there is a word you said which I think is so often missed about acceptance, which is like, acceptance doesn't mean um, allowing things to sort of tolerating bad behavior or believing your thoughts, but it does mean like, oh, this is the thought that's coming up right now. Right now, I'm telling myself I'm not good enough, and actually, I almost quite like saying thank you to the inner critic of like, okay, I appreciate you raising that thought. You've probably got my best interest at heart, but I don't need you to be telling me that right now. I'm just going to, as you say, let it go. And I think there's something about when you bring your attention to it and then say, okay, thank you, and sort of allow it to pass. There's some sort of liberation that comes there. So I'm really glad in those quieter moments, we get the chance to see that these thoughts come and they go, and then they're not actually us in a sort of lasting sense.
Yes, and also, as you say, to almost, I mean, not to make them an enemy, because when you make something an enemy, I think physics, I can't remember my physics from physics GCSE that well, but if you oppose a force, the force tends to get stronger. So as opposed to kind of deflecting the force or going along with that force. So it's the same thing. If you make something an enemy, you're giving it energy. And if it has that energy, it's more likely to then be there and continue, as opposed to sort of dissipating it, absorbing it and letting it be or letting it go. And then you can then choose a different way, I think, or choose a different way of being. But it really is, it is really, I think, a habit to practice. And I think the more you practice it, the better you get at it. Just like if you were to start running or exercising, you get better the more you do it. And so I think if we can see our thoughts and in that sort of, to a degree in that way, I think they seem less of a huge thing to tackle, and actually something that's much more achievable to change, I think.
Mm. In a moment, we're going to come to your questions for Radha. So please do go to the Q&A, add in anything you'd like to ask about, life hacks, what you've heard, or your other questions or ideas. And if you see a question you like, please give it a thumbs up, and the more popular questions will rise to the top. One final one from me, because you've covered so many great things here. We've talked about healthy escapism, different things on relationships, nurturing, kindness, nature, avoiding self-criticism, and so on. You mentioned sleep at the beginning, Radha, and it reminded me of something I heard you say once about what your perfect day, the basic components you'd want to have in a good day. I guess there is no perfect day, but what are some? I think you said there were sort of 5 foundations you look for in a good day. Do you want to just take us through what your 5 would be?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, if I could create my perfect day, I think there'll be sort of 5 elements. So it was a bit like a chemistry experiment, like you were talking before, Mark, about experimenting with what works for you.
Yeah.
So my sort of 5 elements would be definitely sleep. I think as a world, as a society, we are absolutely terrible at prioritizing sleep. It's the first thing to drop off when we kind of get overwhelmed and busy, and we almost treat it a bit like an annoyance. Whereas actually, the science of sleep is it's a very proactive process. Your memories are being laid down, you're processing your emotions, your cells are repairing. They're always, I mean, it's a very busy time, even though we're completely not aware of it. So it's very, very important to have good quality sleep and enough sleep of it for a start. I think the second element for me would be definitely sort of some sort of exercise and movement, because again, that kind of creates a lot of sense of well-being, but also you're getting away from your mind by doing that. I think also the third one would be a sense of purpose. So, I think very important, there's lots of research which has shown if we have a sense of purpose, then actually we live longer and we have a better quality of life. So, why are you here? What do you want to do? What really kind of lights you up? What really makes you want to get out of bed in the morning? So purpose would be there. Socializing, so connection with other people is the kind of 4th element to that, because we know, as we said before, relationships are so important. And then the final one, I think we sort of forget about, we sort of reserve it for sort of children, but adults need joy as well. So I think something joyful, something playful, and something where we're kind of going back a little bit to when we were very little, and what we used to really laugh about, or really find a lot of joy in. So there'd be my kind of five components, five elements for my perfect day.
I love that. Thank you. So sleep, some kind of movement, physical activity, sense of purpose, socializing, and joy. Lovely. Radha, let's come to some questions from this lovely community. Paddy's been really brave and shared something, which I think will be on many people's minds. Says, I've been depressed for over 4 years now. I feel like I have to put a mask on or pretend to be just fine with my friends and work. And internally, it gets worse and worse as time goes by. How can I deal with this?
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that, and that's an easy thing to share. So thank you very much for that. Um, I think first of all to say, in terms of any professional support, that's really important. So whether or not you've got in touch with your doctor, with counsellor, with a psychologist, for example, or even one of the many amazing mental health charities who have lots of helplines available all the time. I think that's so important to allow yourself to kind of ask for that support. I think that's helpful in a couple of ways, in that often we find it easier to talk to someone that we don't know sometimes, and that isn't in our kind of immediate environment, as long as we feel safe with them, because actually we can then offload a lot of the feelings that we have. We can tell someone, and as soon as we tell someone, there's that sense of relief. So I think that's really important to first of all make sure you're kind of okay with getting that support. I think otherwise, it's sometimes when we're feeling depressed, when we have depression and we have a low mood, there's almost a sense in ourselves that we're like, I must fix this, I must get out of this as soon as I can. I must be happy and jolly and the person that other people need me to be. But actually, that pressure again creates another layer, another obstacle, another burden, I think, when you're already feeling low. So what I would try and say is to try and relieve yourself of that, and actually say to yourself, well, if this was a friend of yours who's feeling that way, you wouldn't tell them to cheer up and to pretend to be someone different. You'd want to know how they were feeling. So just in the same way, are there, two or three people who you really trust, friends and family, who you can just be yourself with, and actually you might be surprised by their reaction once you show your feelings, once you show what's happening to you. You won't be surprised by how they do respond. And I think the more we can try to kind of take that mask away and show the people that we feel safe with how we really feel, I think I found in my own experience that actually then those feelings actually kind of tend to sort of pass or get processed a little bit more easily, and a little bit faster for us as well. So it's not easy, but I would maybe just choose sort of one person to try and talk to you about that and to be yourself with. Maybe one activity that we've mentioned tonight or other people have mentioned that you enjoy, that you've forgotten about, just to start that occasionally, doing that one activity, whether that's baking or going for a walk, whatever it might be. Maybe just try that one person, that one activity. And then just the third thing would be just to try and give yourself a little bit of kindness, I think, and be patient with yourself, and try to take that pressure off from you feeling like you have to be someone different and you have to make this go away. Fingers crossed, I'm sure it will go away with the right support, and you're doing really well by the sounds of it. But I think that taking that pressure away from you, ironically, sometimes can actually help us come out the other side.
Thank you, well said. And I just have to say that in various work contexts, I've seen people who have lowered the mask a bit and said, I'm really struggling. And actually, it's turned out to be a remarkable source of strength rather than weakness. And I think we're fortunately getting into a society where that ability to sort of talk about what's really going on is being recognized as the strength it really is, rather than as we used to tell ourselves it was a sign of weakness, because I think that's obviously not the case. Now, Claire's asked a question which lots of people have given a thumbs up to. And it's a tough one, because I think again, lots of people relate to this. I often feel too scared to stand up for myself or be assertive, as I get anxious about confrontational conversation or challenging conversations. I certainly agree with that, Claire. I'm sort of conflict avoidant in many areas as a people-pleasing person. So she asked, how can I be a bit more adult in this area rather than more like a child? How can we stand up for ourselves in a way that's in line with our values, I guess?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for that, because I think lots of people struggle with that, and myself included, in years gone by and still a little bit now. I think I'd also say really important to frame it as you're not being childlike. or childish. It might be an emotion that comes from sort of feeling vulnerable, perhaps from childhood. And sometimes we do, sometimes some of us do kind of almost absorb this pattern, or we develop this pattern because during our childhoods, as we're growing up, we've had a bad experience in later years, when we have sort of tried to stand our own ground or kind of stand up for ourselves, we've had a very bad or difficult response back, and that scared us, and therefore we then have learnt, or we think it's safer to withdraw and not to do that again. So I think it comes from sort of maybe a place from childhood, but I would say it's not childish, it's not childlike, it's actually a very innate response, it's a very natural response. So I think if you're ever in that kind of position, you feel that you notice something's wrong, you want to raise something, or you want to sort of speak up for yourself, and then you start to feel that horrible feeling of anxiety. So just stop in that moment and say, okay, I feel anxiety, I feel anxious. Why is that? What do I think is going to happen if I say whatever I want to say? Will that person, do I think they're going to reject me? Do I think it's going to cause an argument? Do I think they're going to abandon me and not want to be around me anymore? Do I think there's going to be some kind of tension? And what does, and if that reaction happens, what do I think that says about me? Because if you follow each of those stems, maybe someone's going to abandon you or not be around you. That then you're then interpreting that as them sort of basically saying you're not lovable, or the message there is, unless you do what I want you to do, then I'm not going to care about you. So it sounds a little bit complex. It's not really, but it's just about working out what you think is going to happen, what you're frightened of happening, and what does that sort of fear make you think about yourself or who you are. Then taking a big breath and reminding yourself of all the situations and the times where you have said something, you have stood your ground, and it's been okay, and you've been safe, and nothing bad has happened. And then just trying to almost, again, choosing the right people to trial this with, but trying to step out of that pattern and do something different to see what does happen. And then learning, hopefully, fingers crossed, that actually you get a better response you were expecting, and then you build your confidence and you get more and more confident in actually being able to say what you think. You're going to have occasions where you try it and it doesn't work, and you might get sort of a bit scared, and those feelings might come up again. And in those situations, I would question who you're surrounding yourself with. Maybe they're not the right people for you to have in your life. I know sometimes we can't avoid having people in our lives, but maybe they're not the right person to spend a lot of time with if that's the response you're getting. But also, I think it's helpful to realise that actually, even if that person responds in a tricky way or a challenging way, you can actually hold that even then. So even if they react badly, or they leave, or they argue back, can you hold that? Can you hold your space in spite of that? Because actually that then helps you kind of grow as a person, I think. So even if you get the response you don't want, that can still be very helpful for you growing in your confidence and your self-esteem.
Very wise words. And I just like to add that if you haven't already looked into non-violent communication principles, if you're interested in sort of conflict resolution in relationships and so on, the thing that's really changed my life in that area for anyone here is the power of only describing your own feelings and not describing the other person's behaviors or intentions. So saying, when this happens, I feel this way, and it would mean a lot to me if this could be different, rather than you always do this, you never do that. So it's about describing how something is for you rather than critiquing the other person, but in a very clear way about your needs and what is and isn't working for you. So I have found that to be people can't take it badly when you're describing your feelings, but they do tend to take it badly when you describe their behavior, in my experience. Max has got a great question. Maybe this is the most profound one we could ever ask ourselves, but how do you rediscover your purpose when you've lost it?
Oh, that's a great question. Really good. I think it's really helpful to actually realize you have lost your purpose. I think it's a really helpful thing sometimes to happen in life. It's not very nice, and it can feel really scary, but sometimes it's actually really helpful, because again, as we grow, we change, and every single day, every single moment, we're changing as people, because every experience we have is changing who we are potentially. So sometimes we start off with an idea about who we are, what our purpose is, and why we're here, and then we kind of try to align our how we live and our jobs and what we do for work, and how we behave in the world. We try to align that with what we think that purpose is. But as we get older, as things happen to us, that naturally we change, and therefore naturally our purpose and our sort of why can sometimes change as well. So sometimes we things happen, but we don't always catch up with who we are now. And that's what happens, I think, when we sort of get a sense of, oh, I don't know why I'm here, what's my purpose, what's happening. But again, in those moments of real difficulty and feeling quite lost is a real gift. In those moments, we can then sit back and go, gosh, this is scary. I don't know why I'm doing these things anymore. Actually, that's the beginning of actually finding out what your new purpose is. So it's a bit like an animal sort of shedding its skin sequentially. It's like one purpose is gone, the next one comes, the next one comes. So I think if you have sort of lost that sense of purpose, just taking it right back to basics and saying, well, what brings me joy? What do I really love doing? What doesn't feel like work to me out in the world? What feels natural to me? And what have other people around me told me that I'm good at, or my attributes are, and what have they complimented me on? And almost a little bit like career sort of guidance at school, I guess. And I'm not talking about careers when I'm talking about purpose. I'm talking widening this out, but a little bit like that. You don't start with a job and then try and fit that to the person. You start with the person and then try to sort of find a job to suit them. And in the same way, if you're feeling a bit lost, start with who you are right now, and just start to make little notes and start to notice some of those things. And the interesting thing I've found in life is that if you start to do that, often life brings you opportunities. You notice things that are in line with you knowing who you are a bit more. You take up those opportunities, and gradually, slowly but surely, you actually find that kind of sense of, oh, okay, you wake up one morning and say, actually, I do know why I'm here. I know what I'm doing, and I've discovered that. But I think it's about getting back to who you are now and catching up with yourself, a bit like you catch up with a friend you haven't seen for a couple of years. You have to spend quite a lot of time in that first meeting getting to know them again. And I think it's the same when it comes to yourself.
Thank you, Radha. I'm really glad you described it that way, because in fact that's kind of what happened in my life, which is I realized that I was developing this sort of frustration with the conventional path I was on, and a real passion for sort of happiness and how to help bring a more authentic way of living. And it was only because I'd tuned into that within me that I was then had my eyes open to the opportunity to sort of have some of the connections that led to Action for Happiness, now 12, 13 years ago. So what you've just described is kind of what I feel very blessed to have happened upon. I've also found an interesting exercise where if you've got a lot of wisdom, we all have a lot of wisdom within ourselves. One exercise I did was imagine you're towards the end of your life looking back. What advice would your future self give you about what matters right now? So you could take a moment right now just to think about that. What would future me say? And I found future me said, let go of the little stuff, spend time with the people you really care about, and do more projects that bring you a sense of sort of joy and fulfillment. And actually, your inner self may say different things, but I found that we sort of know this stuff. Again, it's a bit like your point earlier. We just need to remind ourselves and get away from all the chaos of modern life and just tune back into I want to be a good person, helping people using my skills in a way that brings a sense of fulfillment. That's kind of what we all want in a way, isn't it? I would like us to pause here because there's loads of. Well, actually, no. Let's take one more, but we need to be quite quick on this. But it's really important because it's got this element of caring for others as well as ourselves, and particularly Tammy's made such an important point about, well, in this case, being a living caregiver of a loved one. How do we make time for self-care when we're somebody that is, spending so much of our time caring for others? And that could be, in those examples, it could also be as a, parent of young children, or a caregiver in some other way. How do we balance that caregiving and self-care?
Yeah, I think that's really, really tricky. But again, something that a lot of people face in many different ways. So thank you for asking the question. I mean, I think it is a little bit of an old sort of adage, but I think it's very true, is that if you're not in a good place yourself, you cannot care well for the other person. And I know that's very difficult sometimes in the reality of life when, there's not a lot of help, potentially a lot of support, a lot of practical kind of, I suppose, safety networks. But it really is true that actually, you can sustain, as human beings, we can sustain an acute period of stress. But it can only be acute. It can only be for a short period of time. If that becomes chronic, then actually that's when difficulties come. That's when actually you're not able to care for that other person either. So if you are the kind of person who really cares about other people, and I'm a bit like this, sometimes it helps me to almost say to myself, look, if you care about that other person that you're actually looking after, you actually need to care about yourself, because if you don't, your health is going to get worse, and therefore their health is then going to suffer. So sometimes you even have to take it to that place to allow yourself to have a bit of time off. But I think it's about realizing that. I think it's also about realizing what are the obstacles to you having sort of self-care. Is that time or practical stuff? How can you delegate? How can you offer support? Is there anyone else around you can ask for actually practical help? Or is it actually a sense of sort of misplaced guilt, that actually, there's potentially time for you to do a bit more self-care, but you feel guilty about that because you think, I should be looking after the other person? Where is that guilt coming from? Is it true? Is it actually accurate? Where is that coming from? And why is it that you think you don't deserve to have that? So I think guilt is a massive thing when it comes to being a caregiver. But I would sort of sit back and really ask yourself the question, where is this guilt coming from? Is it actually appropriate guilt, or is it just something which is a hangover from what I think I should be doing? And try to, again, notice the guilt when it comes up and try to let go of it. And actually, if you've got a friend or someone who cares about you as well, having them encourage you and then say to you, come on, this is ridiculous. There's nothing for you to feel guilty about. You deserve to have some joy and some time to yourself. I think that's also quite helpful to have an advocate in that way as well.
Well said, thank you. So we've talked about the power of small actions, and I will hand back for you to have a final word in a moment, Radha. But just to remind everyone here, hopefully you can now see this on screen, but we of course have our action calendars packed with daily actions that you can take all year round. We're about to wrap up Active April and move towards Meaningful May. So please do, as ever, use and share the Action for Happiness calendars. Rather remarkably, over 50 million people now have been engaging with the calendars. They're shared on social every day. There's an app where you can get involved every day and share what you're up to. So thank you, everyone who's been taking action. Take a moment wherever you are right now and bring to mind an action you'd like to take as a result of today's session. So Radha has shared all these fantastic ideas and life hacks, and we've heard from each other some really great suggestions. So just as a final action for all of you here, wherever you are right now, take a moment to think about what's one thing you'd like to do, keep doing, do differently, introduce, try out, experiment with. And if you wanted to share a few words in the chat one final time, I'd love to see some of what you're going to take away from this really special time together. So again, I'll read a few out as we close. Plant some seeds, prioritize sleep, socialize more, go to bed early, talk more, share some tips from today with colleagues, spend more time daydreaming, be kinder, talk to myself more, keep exercising daily, love one another, be authentic, look after myself, don't feel guilty, find my purpose, bird song, be better to myself, and lots of other lovely suggestions. Radha, I think they seem to have captured the essence of what you've shared. How do you feel seeing that?
I think that's beautiful. I think everyone who's watching, everyone who's sharing anything that can support themselves or other people is just exactly, we need more of it. And so I think I just congratulate everyone for being here, for being interested, for caring about yourselves and other people, because I think, in the world we're in at the moment, I think it's never been more important to do all of these little things that actually might seem little, but actually have a massive, massive difference. So well done. And I'm just really delighted to hear some of these things.
Thank you. So let's just do a final sort of mindful checkout that we do with Action for Happiness, which is bringing to mind the sort of gratitude we feel for all of the stuff we've been through together today, and just to sort of send some of that vibe out into the world at a time of so much challenge and struggle. There are other people in the world who could really use more of what we've talked about here today. So sending that sort of well-wishing out into the world and trying to take that vibe with us as we go off into our busy lives. And I particularly want to express my gratitude to you, Radha, for today and for this session, but for everything you've done through your work and also your support of Action for Happiness, which has really made a difference for me personally, and also that your work has touched so many lives. And tomorrow we'll send around a link to the video from this and to some of your resources and articles and podcast and book and so on. But I'd love to hand back to you for the final word, really. Is there a sort of way you'd like to wrap up the whole message of what we've talked about tonight?
Oh, well, thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody, for joining. It's been absolutely beautiful to be here. I think the one thing I would just say is no matter what situation you're in or how you're feeling in any particular moment, there's always something little that you can do to just help yourself feel a little bit better. And I think that's what I encourage, just those really small moment to moment choices. And and if you know anyone who's struggling with it, just to encourage them to believe that actually things can be different through action, which is what we're all doing here today.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Keep up the great work. See you again soon. And thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thanks, everyone.